This is the youngest person ever to be executed in America. Today's story is probably one of the saddest but yet controversial stories I have ever came across. This is the case of George Stinney. George was a 14-year-old African American who lived in a town that saw heavy segregation. George would be accused of murdering two white girls close to his home. This story comes to a fast end almost as an open and shut case, but the reality of this case seems to dig a little deeper than that. Many say that George was guilty, and now many say that he had nothing to do with the murders. Hi, I'm Zach and welcome to Rooted Expeditions. If you're a fan of the abandoned, historical, and strange events, then you're in the right place. I post videos just like this every week. Hit that thumbs up and let's get started in today's history. In March 1944 in South Carolina, there was this small segregated mill town, and in that town there were these two young girls, Mary and Betty, who were 9 and 11. They went outside to play one day and to ride their bikes and pick flowers around their neighborhood. But that night, when the two girls didn't return home for dinner, their parents began to worry, and when several hours went by, they would send out a search party to find them. As they were searching, they would find the two girls lying dead in a ditch. They had been brutally beaten over the head with a railroad spike. Immediately, they went to find the killer, and somehow police were led to the house where 14-year-old George Stinney lived. At the time, his parents were not home, and police would end up arresting George and his older brother Johnny. And while all this was going on, Amy, George's sister, being scared of the situation and the police being there and not knowing what's happening or what's going to happen, she would end up hiding in their chicken coop out back. While George and his brother were at the station being questioned, they would eventually let Johnny go, and then they would turn all their focus on George. The police were trying to find someone to link the crimes to ease the family of the two girls. They would focus on George since it was said that he was the last one to see the two girls alive by the railroad tracks. Then, to quickly put an end to all of this, police would find George guilty and sentence him to death by electrocution. And a few months later, on June 16, 1944, George was electrocuted until death. Now, this isn't where the video is going to stop. No. Let's dive into the story of what really happened and what was said. After police arrested George and his brother Johnny, they would question him in a small room alone and without his parents or even an attorney. After they questioned and interrogated George, police would claim that the boy confessed to killing the two girls and wanting to even assault them, so they would quickly rush him to trial. So when the trial happened, it only took about 2 hours and only took 10 minutes for the jury to decide and convict George to death by electrocution. What really raises many flags in this story is that there was no evidence. There was no written confession to the murders presented in court. And in fact, there was no written confession at all. There was not even any witnesses. While in court, George would pretty much be on his own, as African Americans were not allowed in the courtroom. From what was searched, it was just a blind side to the young boy by an all-white justice system. Still to this day, South Carolina still recognizes George Stinney as a murderer. That's until new details started to surface later when a statement was found from George's former cellmate, which claims that George told him, and I quote, I didn't do it. Why would they kill me for something I didn't do? And to top that off, George's sister, Amy, came forward in 2014 and said that George had a pretty solid alibi that was never asked for nor heard by anyone. His sister, who stated at the age of 77, said that she knows that her brother did not kill those girls. In fact, she stated that they were together at the time that they said that the crime happened. They were out watching their family's cow graze near some railroad tracks by their home. They even saw Betty and Mary riding their bikes around the railroad tracks, and the two girls ended up spotting George and Amy and rode over and asked them, "Could you tell us where we could find some maypops?" And George and Amy replied and said, "No." And so the two girls rode off. And that was the last time that they saw the two girls. Which, if you didn't know what maypops are, they are these yellow edible fruits that come off the passion flower. This has been a very disputed case for many years, and here is a twist that adds to the other side that claims that George is guilty. After the crime happened, George's family fled their home, and his other brother, Charles, would later state that they never came forward because they were terrified. He said, and I quote, "George's conviction and execution was something my family believed could happen to any of us in the family. Therefore, we made a decision for the safety of the family to leave it be." At the time of the crime, a police officer wrote a handwritten statement saying, and I quote, "I arrested a boy by the name of George Stinney. He then made a confession and told me where to find a piece of iron about 15 inches long. He said he put it in a ditch about 6 feet from the bicycle." Then, to add to that, a boy named James, whose father was the sheriff at the time, he would ride in the back seat of the car with George when his father drove him to prison. Why was the kid in the back seat with a supposed murderer? Why would you do that? I don't know. So as James was in the back seat with George as his father was taking him to prison, James would say that George was real talkative, and he would even state that George says that he was really sorry and he didn't want to kill those girls. So as James was riding in the backseat with George as his father was taking George to prison, James would state that George was real talkative, and he would end up saying that he was real sorry and he didn't want to kill those girls. George was barely 5 feet tall and not even 100 pounds. When they strapped him in the electric chair, the straps were just too big for his little body. It was even said that they had to put several books in the chair so that George could sit on top of those books because he was so small that his head could not reach the headpiece that was attached to the top of the electric chair. When George was asked if he had any last words, he said, "No, sir." Even when they encouraged him to speak and say, "Do you have any last words? You could speak your last words." And he would say, "No, sir." I will leave you with that, and let me know what you think really happened in the comments below. Here's a little bit of history for you. Please subscribe. Peace. I love you, and as always, God bless.